Okay, it is a big pleasure to welcome with us for the eighth interview Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo. Just a short introduction. Before we start our eighth interview with Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo, just a little testimony about the importance of her teaching and how precious and practical it is at the same time, and touches our daily life deeply. While reading her book, Daily Life as Meditation Practice, which is this book, I came across this golden rule that she teaches. She says in page 249, once we understand that everything we experience now is the result of past causes, we can understand that what happens to us now is not so important. What is important is the way we respond to everything that is giving to us to live, because this is what determines our future. And end of quote. I have meditated several times on this golden rule, and I have seen in it a small difference that makes all the difference. The important thing is not what happens to me in my life, but rather how I respond to what happens to me, or how I react to what happens to me. So why do I worry about what will happen to me tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? And why should I be afraid of what is happening to me now, no matter how dangerous it is? As long as I have no power over what happens to me, but rather over my reaction to it, let me concentrate on the later. And this simple rule had helped me a lot in many difficult health and other situations. Everything changed as soon as my attention shifted from the event to my reaction to it. And with the deep conviction that I cannot change what will happen to me, but by changing my reaction, I choose to be free and determine my tomorrow. I felt so better and freer. And since I have been applying this golden rule of Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo, I feel less anxiety and much less fear and much more ability to deal with what happens to me. Whether it is good or bad, it does not matter. So many thanks to Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo, and welcome again to you between us. Do you have to say, before starting our questions, you have something to say before? Jetsumna? Are you hearing?
Yes, I hear you perfectly, Lwiis.
Okay, okay. So I say, before starting my question, do you have something to say?
Not really. What would you like me to say?
Okay, so we'll start directly. Dear Jetsumna, we start our questions with the point where we ended the previous interview. It is about fear. You say in your book, Daily Life as Meditative Practice, in page 172, ask fear where it comes from, and who is afraid? This is a good question to ask if you are afraid. End of quote. My question, is it a question of some duality within us, a part of us that is afraid and a part that is not?
Well, you know, basically, yes, of course. I mean, fear comes from the conceptual consciousness, our ordinary everyday consciousness and subconscious, which is based on the ego, right? I mean, so the ego itself is our duality. There's me and everything else which is not me. So naturally from that, there arises these disturbing emotions, you know, like anger and greed and also fear. So what I was trying to say at that time was that when fear comes up, we should not be afraid of fear. Instead, we should relax and look into the face of the fear, ask the fear, what's its problem? What is it afraid of? You know, make friends with the fear rather than, you know, try to suppress it or avoid it. Look at it as it's trying to tell us something and listen to what the fear is saying. Also think about what part of the body is experiencing the fear, right? And then again, to ask, who is afraid, right? Because this fear, this strong emotion, if we follow it instead of trying to avoid it or get rid of it, if we follow it down, we can get some very strong insight into the cause of the fear and who thinks that they are experiencing the fear. Because, you know, in our primordial awareness, in our genuine nature of the mind awareness, you know, our true nature, it cannot be afraid because the very nature of our primordial consciousness is beyond duality, right? So therefore there would be no fear. But as long as we are trapped in our dualistic consciousness, which is our normal conceptual thinking mind, then all these emotions will come up. And the point is to look straight at them and see what they are telling us. Listen to them rather than say, I don't like you, I want to get rid of you. Just sit down and have a tea party, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine you're both sitting there and drinking a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and discussing together what's our problems. Listen to the fear, and rather than try to you know, either obliterate it or pretend it's not there. Mm-hmm. We can learn a lot. Insight comes from understanding where these emotions come from and who we imagine is experiencing them. So they can be a great guide on the path. You know, they're not the enemy. Mm-hmm. They can be a friend.
Jitsumna, is it especially and exclusively our ego who has fear?
Yes, of course.
And why?
Because if we are beyond the ego into the, you know, our true expansive nature, in that there is no fear. Of course we are fearless. But because we are trapped in our little me mind, then that makes the duality, that makes the separation. You know, the fundamental nature of our consciousness connects us with everything. So there is no fear. But our ordinary conceptual thinking mind governed by the ego is exactly what creates this sense of being separate, being me, and then everything else which is not me, the other. And that creates all our negative emotions, you know, our fear, our anger to what displeases us, our greed and attachment to what we like, our envy of people getting things we want, and so forth. It's all based around this conceptual thinking mind, thinking me the whole time. All spiritual paths, Lwiis, all genuine spiritual paths are about how to overcome the small self, to open up to the innate divine by whatever name. And so that's what we're trying to do. And fear is a very clear manifestation of the small self.
جتسمنا ego and mind are same thing, same entity, or
Basically, ego just means I, right? It's Latin word for I. And so it's the sense of I as something solid, unchanging, uniquely me, which makes me different from everything else, which is non-I. And that is our basic delusion. That is the fundamental cause of our ignorance, and creates all this grasping and aversion and all these other negative emotions in the mind. It's all around me, right?
Yeah.
And so all genuine spiritual traditions are about how to loosen the hold of the ego and open up into a whole different level of consciousness, which unites us with things instead of separating us. And, we recognize that our unhappiness is based on clinging to a false identity. What to do, all genuine spiritual paths are about how to untie this knot inside us, right? It's very tight little knots of meanness inside, how to open and loosen that and let it gracefully fall away. It's a process, it doesn't happen like that. It's gradually, we begin to make our sense of self more peaceful, more kind, more aware. And, we make friends with our ego, not warring with our ego. We're trying to make friends with the sense of I-ness so that we can walk the path towards the dropping of the I-ness. And doesn't mean we cease to exist. We suddenly feel like we've woken up. There's this whole different way of relating to reality, which normally is closed off from us. And because it's closed from us, we suffer. But that's not our true nature. Our true nature is wonderful, but we don't know that. That's our tragedy, isn't it?
You are just talking about how body is experiencing fear. So we should observe our body, how it is experiencing fear, and to respond to fear.
We should make friends with fear. We should make friends with fear. We shouldn't be afraid of fear. Allow the fear to come up and look straight at it and question it, right? Where is it coming from? What does it feel like? And as I say, who is afraid? This is the very important question, because then we will say, I am afraid. And then the question, who am I? Right? So it helps us to gain deeper and deeper insight into the nature of our consciousness.
Okay.
It therefore becomes a friend on the path, not an enemy, not an obstacle. It's an opportunity to learn.
But what about the body? The body help us in this situation of fear and observing the body, how it.
We can see where in the body this fear. If someone is very afraid, the body reacts. Like if you're feeling joyful, if you're feeling angry, there is, the whole body and breath respond to the state of mind, right? So if there is fear, sometimes people feel it like in their heart or, in their gut, right? And just observe it and try to open it up, let it go, relax, and allow the feelings to come up without tension and without rejection. And then gradually that we begin to able to, as I say, to untie this knot inside us and release it, right?
Okay.
because we have to accept it. First, we have to recognize it, then we have to accept it. Then we work with it, right?
Mhm.
To release it.
Okay. Jetsumna, question number 2, talking about the mind and our mind, you say, page 182, you say, we are a bit like someone who thinks he is walking his dog, but ends up following the dog wherever it leads him. My question, it is a bit funny, but it is quite and true, and it is the experience of each of us. So how do we take over and become masters of our minds again?
I mean, this is the whole point, isn't it? That we should not be the slaves of our mind. We should become the masters of our mind, right? So for this, we need awareness, really. Awareness, cultivating the awareness of the mind, looking at the mind, so we're not swept away by the thoughts, right? Like when we think, it's like being in a tumultuous river, and we're normally swept along by the river. We're completely submerged in the river. So meditation allows us, right? It allows us to see the thoughts, step back, sit on the banks of the river, watching the river, not being swept along by the river. That's what meditation is for, to understand that thoughts are just thoughts, right? They're not me. They're not mine. I mean, normally when we think thoughts, we believe our thoughts, right? Don't believe your thoughts. Maybe sometimes thoughts are true, sometimes thoughts are not true, But if we are able to make that space within the mind, normally we're completely choked by our thinking. So now we're stepping back and we are creating this space between the observer and the observed, the thoughts, and then gradually, as the thoughts get slower and slower as we watch them, then between the thoughts, there is also a space, right? And so we begin to get, in our mind, it begins to get more clear, more calm, and we begin to become in control of our thoughts, that we can think what we want to think. We don't have to think what we don't want to think, right? It's very important. The mind calms down. It becomes more clear. We do not get caught up in the past or in the future unless we choose to do so, right? Normally, when we are thinking we're back in the past or we're planning for the future, and if we're in the present, we're just thinking about the present. We're not experiencing the present without judgments, without conceptual prejudices. So then our mind becomes a tool for us. It's not the master anymore, right? We use the mind skillfully instead of the mind using us, usually unskillfully.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why meditation and beginning to really, it's not the ultimate reality because there's still a subject and object, but it is a very important step forward to become aware of the process of thinking instead of being swept along by our thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, really.
Jetsumna, you are just telling that we should not be a slave of our mind. Do you think we are slave of our mind because we ignore how it is working?
Yeah, I mean, the ego is in charge. Now, the ego can be helpful if it's the servant, but when it's the master, because it's governed by ignorance, it's a very cruel master. It doesn't work because it doesn't know what it's doing. And so then we are caught up in all our thinking, and our thinking, if we see something we like, greed arises. If we see something we don't like, aversion arises, and all sorts of unskillful worries and anxieties and fears and all this remembering things in the past which disturbed us, being afraid of the future in case something bad will happen to us. It's like, it really is like a very tumultuous, out of control river or waterfall even. I mean, we are not in control. And so how can we have peace? Mm-hmm. Right? Our mind is totally unpeaceful. It's like, just waves just, rolling around. Then you can't see anything. You cannot see with clarity because we're caught on the surface of our consciousness, right? On the waves going up and down. And until the waves quieten down a bit, then we begin to see with some clarity what's really going on inside. And we have some, control over what we want to think and how we want to think and how we want to use our heart in a positive way instead of being caught up in all the poisons. Our thinking can be very poisonous. Mm-hmm. And this is why the world is so in such a state. It's because it's controlled by people whose own minds are not in control, right? They are controlled by mostly the negative, greed for power and control, aversion and anger, pride, envy, jealousy, all these and fear of others. No wonder we're destroying the planet and each other and all the beings that live on the planet, because we are just controlled by these totally out of controlled minds.
Yeah, you are just.
It's very, you
really are just telling Jetsumna that we should use our mind and not be using by it. You think that we are always using by our mind and not use it?
Well, basically, yeah, that's why I'm saying we're the slaves of our thoughts. If an angry thought comes up, then we feed it. We get all upset, angry, and start speaking bad words and doing bad actions. Or if greed comes up in our mind, then we want that object. We've got to have it. We get completely obsessed by it, and so forth. We have no control. And then we suffer and we cause suffering to everybody else. And in the end, we deplete our own planet, which is our home, because of our aggression and our greed. I mean, there's no doubt. Look at it. Where does it start from? It starts from our own heart and mind. Mm-hmm. You can't blame the planet. You can only blame who is living on the planet that's destroying it. It's not the tigers and the lions, right? They are considered wild animals. They're not wild animals. They're just natural. Mm-hmm. But who is destroying millions of other sentient beings, living beings on this planet, and destroying each other at the same time are us. And why? Because though we have great potential for wisdom and compassion, that's closed off, and all we have is our negative defilements, which control. Look at us. I mean, you can't deny it. It's all there. It comes from us. It doesn't come from outside.
Okay. Jetsumna,
we're pretty stupid. We're called Homo sapiens, but we're not very sapientious. We're pretty dumb.
Okay, my question number 3, Jetsumna. In the same context of the mind, you say in page 182, you said when people can't control their behavior, it is because they can't control their mind. We all have this problem to a greater or lesser degree. My question, so should we work only on the level of the mind or both levels, mind and behavior or action to control?
Well, of course, our skillful and unskillful actions, right, of body, speech, and the mind are based on the prior intention, right? So an action is skillful or unskillful depending on the genuine intention behind it. Is that intention skillful or unskillful? Meaning, is it wholesome or unwholesome, right? So while we can indeed give mindfulness to our body and our speech, nonetheless, ultimately, it all depends on the mind, you know, on the mindset behind it. If our mind is kind and peaceful and you know, has wholesome states, then our speech and our actions will be wholesome. If our mind is filled with negative emotions, then our speech and our body will likewise carry out these, you know, negative emotions. So ultimately, though we can be aware of our body, it's good to be aware of our body, our postures, whether we're walking, to know we're walking, sitting, we know we're sitting, to be aware of our speech and the tone of our voice and what words we are saying. But all of that depends on the awareness, and awareness is in the mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My question number 4, Tsumna, concerning mindfulness, you say in page 92, even the most mundane activity becomes a profound meditation, provided we do it in presence and awareness. My question, the big problem is that most of our daily actions are reflexes to which we are accustomed. We drive our cars, we eat, we walk, etc., without thinking about what we are doing. Is this a bad habit, or how we can correct it?
Lwiis.
We've lost him.
Wait, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so my dear Lwiis, this is what mindfulness is all about, right? We start by taking a routine action, right? Such as walking, drinking tea, brushing our teeth, anything which we normally carry out this with automatic actions, and our mind is off somewhere else. Like you're drinking tea and you're thinking about what you're going to do next, or what you did yesterday, or whatever, you know. But the one thing you're not thinking about is the action of actually drinking the tea, right? And so this is the point, right?
Yeah.
Our mind is usually off in the past or the future. It's not where our body is, where we actually are. So then we give full attention to this habitual action. We can decide on an action, right? To start with, you can say, well, when I'm going to walk from here to here, I'm going to be just aware of walking, not thinking about walking or conceptualizing about it, but just knowing the action as it takes place. Or when I brush my teeth, I'm going to just be relaxed and be completely present with the action of brushing the teeth, right? So we give full attention to this habitual action, which normally we ignore, and we bring our mind into the present moment. So we are relaxed, not tensed up, very relaxed, but aware, right? So then that brings a sense of very spacious clarity and awareness. We're present. Normally our mind hates being present. It has to be understood that the ego, our sense of I, only can live in the past and the present, in the future. It cannot live in the absolute present moment. If we are absolutely present without commenting on it, which is again the conceptual mind, if we are simply relaxed and present and clear, there is no ego.
Not we should try that our ego be present in this moment, or he is not able to be present.
It cannot be present. The ego can only live in the past and the future, or run around commenting, judging, chattering, about what it considers to be the present, but it cannot just relax into that open spaciousness of what is happening here and now, because you know that is something which is not part of the conceptual thinking mind. It's just a sense of presence, and that gives the mind great openness, spaciousness, and this sense of tremendous, like suddenly you've woken up. Yeah, it's a sense of great clarity. And you feel relaxed, even if you're working. I mean, you could be chopping wood, but if you're doing it in this sense of mindfulness, awareness, then the mind and the body are completely revived through the work. It hasn't exhausted us. We feel more awake than ever. But the problem is that we don't want, the ego feels threatened by that. So it will do everything it can to distract us, including if we're brushing our teeth and we're trying to just know that we're brushing the teeth. It will immediately start saying, oh, look, now I'm being so mindful. Yes, this is easy. It's easy to be mindful. I don't know why people aren't mindful more than this. And blah, 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 blah. And we're not mindful at all. Right?
But Jetsumna, to be beyond ego, we should not be realized to be beyond it.
You know, I mean, the ego is just a fabrication of the conceptual mind. It doesn't really exist. So it's not like we're trying to destroy something which actually has an existence. It's a fabrication of our mental consciousness. It's not real. So even if we are deeply realized people, we can still make use of the ego, but we don't believe in it anymore. We don't think it's me. It's just a very useful function of the mental capacity to organize our mental thinking. But it's not something, the problem is that we think of our ego as something real, solid, unchanging, the center of me. And that's the mistake. That's the mistake, because if we look for it, and a lot of
وجرى جرى تعال تشوف يا عم وين صرت باينك هاي ها اجي